Avengers Endgame is sweeping the world. Not the end game for Blue White Pulse. The series continues. Welcome you to the Blue White Pulse. Great to have you with us. A lot of ground to cover here over the next 30 minutes as we talk Penn State football. We'll also touch on the State College Spikes a little bit later with Joe Putnam as well. Great to have Josh Sperber here in the set. Thomas Frank-Carr, who is now the media consultant for Pro Football Focus for the 49ers.
49ers media correspondent, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great. We're 2,500 miles away. So it's great.
It's a new age. You can be anywhere at any time.
Yeah, and believe me, our producer John Stroh wants me other places, other times.
Most of the time?
Yes.
Very good. Probably rather ship you to San Francisco. To
All right. So this may be, quote, a quiet time of the year, but it's been anything but quiet. Tommy Stevens put his name into the transfer portal. What were your initial thoughts, the two of you, when you saw this happen and the potential result?
Well, I think it starts with what he said in the Center Daily Times before the game, talking to them about how he wants to be a starter, wants to win a national championship, be a Heisman winner. And kind of it was said out there was if he doesn't start here, he's starting somewhere. So when he didn't get that guarantee in the spring, clearly he didn't get that from James Franklin. It felt inevitable at that point once you read the tea leaves.
Yeah, and it's hard to give a guy a guarantee when he's been injured for the entire spring. Like, would Tommy Stevens have been the starter if he stayed through the position battle? Probably, but, you know, as you said, Thomas, he didn't get that guarantee, and it's his last year of eligibility, so it makes sense that he wants to go somewhere where he knows that he can start.
No question, the loyal soldier for 4 years. Here are the numbers, at least the base numbers, for Tommy Stevens before as to what he did at Penn State. It turned out he did not have a 100-yard passing game in his career. He did have a 113-yard rushing game at Maryland to close out the 2017 season. But everyone knows he has great potential. The question is going to be where he ends up. The rumors are, of course, Mississippi State, but that hasn't been settled yet.
Yeah, and I think that's what you said, Josh, about that's not how football works. You don't get to be just named the starter if you're not a returning starter. So I think that's where you start with that. And then if you go back to what he said about his goals, he wants to be a national champion. He wants to be a Heisman winner. If Mississippi State is the place, and it looks like it is just based on need and where he's going to go, they're the sixth best team according to Pro Football Focus from last year, where you've got Georgia and Alabama. They were the two top overall graded teams last year from Pro Football Focus. You got Florida, you've got Auburn, and they were tied with Kentucky for 35th. So I'm not sure, like, if he wants those goals to be his stated goals. If he wants those, you're going to be maybe the sixth best team in that conference.
Well, let's simplify it even more so. If you go to Mississippi State, you're in the same division with Alabama, Auburn, LSU, Texas A&M. I rest my case. We move on. Okay, so now let's get to Sean Clifford. There's an old saying I've lived by for a long time. I don't worry about who's not here. I worry about who is here. When you look at Sean Clifford, what do you say?
Well, I've really liked what I've seen from Sean Clifford. You know, he's still working on his ability as a runner, but his arm looks very good. In very limited action last year, he was 5 for 7. So, I mean, he's clearly a guy who can get the ball to his receivers. He's got a lot of respect around the locker room. So I think he, you know, obviously needs some experience, but he'll definitely get that this season.
Thomas, let's take an old saying. He can spin it.
Yeah, it's interesting. You'd rather have good reps when you have limited reps than bad reps. Yeah. He had a 93 overall grade from Pro Football Focus last year, but you said he was 5 of 7. It's such a small sample size that you don't really know what the full picture is for Sean Clifford yet. In the game versus Kentucky on one drive, I think it was 1 or 2 drives, he had a 70.3 grade overall. So the highs and lows, he was a redshirt freshman playing in a bowl game after your starter gets injured. I thought in the moments you did see him, he looked good, but as far as projection to being a great starter, all the stuff is there. We just have to see, all the on-the-field production has to come yet.
And a big high from him, though, Steve, was that record-breaking touchdown pass,
Sure.
longest one in the history of Beaver Stadium. So he's clearly got some potential. He can throw.
But what's interesting is that if you're going into the season, let's take Tommy Stevens. None of us have ever seen him do a 2-minute drive in the clutch.
And I think that's
That
important
would be
too.
the same thing with Sean. In other words, there's no difference there. One's older.
You have 41 total passing attempts from Tommy Stevens. You have 11 from Sean Clifford. So that's really what it is now you have just one option instead of two.
We'll look at the draft after this. The NFL draft, and Penn State well represented in the NFL draft, including a lot of guys that are going to have no problem making their way to Philadelphia because it's only going to be a 4-hour drive for them. Look at the number of guys that ended up in Philadelphia. Miles Sanders in round 2, Sharif Miller, last pick of round 4, then Ryan Bates and DeAndre Tompkins, both as undrafted free agents. Josh, all right, and you're a diehard Giants fan, so they're right there in your division with your people. All right, what did you think of the Eagles draft?
I thought, we've seen these guys at Penn State. They're going to be very good at the next level. Miles Sanders is probably the most intriguing pick because Eagles just have so many running backs. But I think, he has some experience as a returner, so we could learn from Sproles and Smallwood, maybe get some reps in there. But he was a great between the tackles back. A lot of carries for averaging over 5 yards a carry for Penn State. He could be dangerous and maybe could challenge Jordan Howard for that top spot.
Yeah, they had a lot of running backs. You're right. They had a lot of running backs. They didn't have a lot of great running backs. They didn't have a lot of good running backs last year. From a draft standpoint, Pro Football Focus isn't really high on taking a running back in the first 3 rounds, simply because if you want to improve your running game, you improve everything around the running back, and that allows the running back to succeed. That being said, the Eagles are pretty good everywhere. And then they hedged their bets with J.J. Arcega-Whiteside right after that, a guy who was the number 1 wide receiver on our big board. And Miles was the 3rd running back on our running back board. Good player. I know Austin Gale from Pro Football Focus, we had him on our show earlier this year. Loved Miles Sanders, and I think there's more as a pass-catching back that he can do at the next level. So even though the Pro Football Focus stance is don't take a running back that high, it's one of those situations where it was a good pick for the Eagles because they were so bad at running back last year.
Yeah, I think it was definitely a value pick. And I think Sharif Miller as well, someone that it wasn't really talked about because of how deep the defensive class was in the draft this year. And his numbers at the combine weren't at the level that we saw him play at Penn State. And I think that if you watch his tape here, he came great off the edge. He had really good instincts coming off the line, and I think he could be a force on that defensive front.
Here's another part, too. If you're an undrafted free agent, where do you fit? Well, in the NFL, you have 45 spots. Bates can play all 5 offensive line spots. So is that his edge? DeAndre Tompkins can return punts as well as being a receiver. Can that be his edge? You've got to find an edge if you're an undrafted free agent. Connor McGovern. The Dallas Cowboys have done about as well as anybody of drafting offensive line after going all glamour for years when Jerry Jones was running the draft. McGovern's another guy, can play 2 spots. How important is that?
Well, with Travis Frederick's future uncertain with Dion Barr syndrome, I think it is, he could play guard, he could play center. We've seen him play both. He did struggle in pass protection. He gave up, I think it was 15 pressures last year from the guard position. So he'll be in that mix with their second-round pick last year from Texas at that guard position and can play center. So it's a good value pick in the 3rd round as far as bolstering positions where they have some questions and he has flexibility at that position.
And I think the value as well is for McGovern because, the Cowboys have had one of the best offensive lines in the NFL for years now.
Yeah, when they're healthy. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And with McGovern, a guy who can play, pretty much any position on that line, he's got a great learning opportunity for some Pro Bowl type veterans.
I'm going to save Trace to last year, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Amani Oruwariye ends up going in round 5. I thought he'd be probably round 3, no later than 4. So I was surprised at how late, but I liked the fit. What did you guys think?
It was a huge upset. He was our 5th best corner on the draft board. You talk about length, you talk about ball skills. He's got all of those things. And the question was, does he stop the run? And I think it's John Dorsey of the Browns that said corners are paid to cover. So right. We thought it was a huge upset and a great value.
All right, now I want to get to Trace McSorley. System-wise, nobody plays the system in the NFL that the Baltimore Ravens do. So to me, you need 3 quarterbacks that are of similar ilk. Obviously, Jackson, RG3, now they've got Trace. Did you like that spot?
I mean, I was surprised because I thought a team like the Patriots or the Packers with a veteran quarterback would draft him and kind of get him to groom and maybe, with his winning pedigree, groom someone to replace them. But I think, the more I looked at it, as you said, Steve, it's the system, and I think 3 really good running quarterbacks, learning behind RG3, who's been around football for a long time, and Lamar Jackson, who I think is going to be a great quarterback, is a good spot.
Because you don't want to change system mid-season. You've got to have 3 guys that have the same skill sets.
Right, and I will quote one of our guys that on the podcast. It's you give them credit for fully committing to their plan and to their system.
Yep.
We just don't like the system. We don't like the plan. We don't think it's a great plan. But you're right, Trace fits really well in that system.
And I agree. That's not the plan I would go with, but if that's your plan, you have to have bodies that fit the plan. More after this. Welcome back. Penn State entering into a quiet time, so why are we doing this segment? Oh, sorry. Penn State into a quiet time. So now they got to go into the summer. So let's take a trip into the summertime. What are certain areas where, when they work on their own or they work with Dwight Galt and his great staff, I mean, what do you want to see when they get to camp?
I think it's just going to be in continued improvement. We've seen from the NFL Combine that Penn State and their developmental system is very good. So those guys you saw last year, how much of a step physically can they take forward, especially along that offensive line? We're going to have some young guys. Rasheed Walker is another one of those guys who's got to step into a big position this year. So we'll see what sort of steps he can take forward going into next year. Young
guys, okay? You got KJ Hamler out there, a grizzled vet as a redshirt sophomore. But you got Jahan Dotson, you got Justin Shorter, Daniel George, and then eventually Mac Hippenhammer. How important will it be to find those other complements to what KJ does?
Oh, huge. I mean, he was the best player in that receiving corps by a lot in a season mired by drops. So, it's hard to say if we've found like a guy who's 100% like the number 2 guy just yet because, it's still the off season. But I think there is so much potential in that wide receiver room. And if Jared Parker really is that right guy that they hired as coach, he has an embarrassment of riches to work with.
Well, and I know we talk about receivers as the number 2 receiver, but Pat Freiermuth had a fantastic season last year. I mean, as far as a weapon and a threat in the offense, I think he's your number 2 guy right now. And I feel pretty good about that. I think he had a really good season last year.
Another grizzled veteran as a true sophomore.
Yeah, right?
He played so much last year, you feel like he's been there for years. I think Nick Bowers is also really important to what they're going to do there. Now the running back part. Penn State, 15, 16, 17, they had Saquon Barkley, a little bit of Miles Sanders. Last year, for the most part, Miles Sanders. How different is it now with Ricky Slade, Journey Brown, Noah Cain, Devin Ford?
Well, I really liked Ricky Slade. I thought he was developing into a solid complement to Sanders last year, and then obviously he went down with the injury. But having him in a feature back role with Journey Brown, who, if you follow football in the state of Pennsylvania, you know who Journey Brown is.
And I think it goes back to what we said about Miles Sanders going into the NFL. He could very well lead the league in rushing because the offensive line in front of him is one of the better ones in football. The questions for the running game and the running backs, I think, will largely be determined by the offensive line. You got Michael Mennett returning. Yep. He had a 72.5 grade for us last year, so you expect him to improve. And then we talked about Rasheed Walker. The opposite of Sean Clifford, where if you want to have a small sample size, you want it to be good. He wasn't particularly good last year, but at the tackle position, it's such a hard transition from even in college to the NFL, where years 2, 3, and 4, you see a marked improvement. So you're betting on the talent of a guy who's 6'6", 308 right now to improve and be good in that position. So I think the offensive line is going to go a long way to determining how successful these guys are.
I thought he was pretty good in the spring. Just as a starting point. As a starting point. It's not a game, but as a starting point. They do have depth, though, on the defensive front and at linebacker. Now, let's start with the defensive front. Penn State likes to play a lot of people up front, so depth is critical as to how many. Is it 8, maybe 10 guys you rotate in that defensive front?
Yeah, that front 7 is going to be scary good this season. I mean, you have 2 guys who can start on like any position on the defensive line. Jason Owe is a guy that was talked about a lot in the spring. 6'5", 250. Apparently he ran a 4.3, 340. Come on. Like, how do you defend against that? And we obviously saw what Yetur Gross-Matos could do.
Yeah, Yetur and Shaka Toney are in the top 10 of the returning edge defenders for Pro Football Focus in the Big Ten, so that's a good place to start, having two guys there. At linebacker, I know he was a true freshman playing at a different position in college. Micah Parsons was the third highest rated defender for Penn State on the entire defense last year. We track a thing called run stop percentage, where it's your total number of tackles, your misses, and then the number of tackles that the offense loses on that, where you lose yardage. He was 17th in the nation at run stop percentage, again, at a new position as a true freshman. So linebacker, his coverage ability needs to get better, but as far as a physical specimen and a guy who clearly has football instincts, I think that's a guy you want to highlight going forward, and they will.
No, each one of you pick a young guy that stood out to you during the course of the spring. So, young guy that stood out to you.
I'm going to go back on the offense with Noah Cain. You know,
Okay.
you look at what he did in that blue-white game, and obviously you said it's a small sample size, but he got promoted to the blue team where we're playing with the starters after he just cut up that front seven, 2 touchdowns. He looked pretty good and could factor into that running back room.
I know it's a safe pick, but Tariq Castro-Fields, like you said, so many young guys, you want to have somebody proven. He allowed a 56.6 passer rating against last year in the Big Ten, opposite Amani Oruwariye, who we talked about was one of the best corners in the draft this past week. And I think he's going to be a stable force going forward and someone that's going to help that secondary.
Yeah, Tariq and I were talking about the fact he has 1 career interception. I said, well, Tariq, they do have to throw in your direction for it to happen. He said, yeah. Joe Putnam on the Spikes next. And welcome back. We've been talking, of course, about Penn State football, but the summers around here changed dramatically in 2006 when the State College Spikes, now the affiliate of the St. Louis Cardinals, came into existence. Yes, 14 seasons, and now I'm going to have the privilege of working the 12th of those 14 seasons with my broadcast partner, Joe Putnam. Joe, great to have you with us.
Great to be here, Steve. Glad to be able to talk with you guys about Spike season. Summer is fast approaching here in Central PA.
6 weeks, Joe, 6 weeks, and then we get a great 11-week run of 38 fun nights at the ballpark that include 3 bobbleheads along the way. And you know what? There's a baseball component to the Trace McSorley bobblehead.
Yes, indeed. The first 1,000 fans of all ages will get that Trace McSorley bobblehead August the 25th. That is a Sunday here at Medler Field at Lebrano Park. But, of course, as we all know, Trace famous for that home run swing after big Penn State touchdowns, big plays, and, of course, there have been plenty of those over the past 3 seasons for him, the past 4 seasons, really, in a Nittany Lion uniform. But now, as he is moving on to the NFL, we'll commemorate his career in the blue and white with the bobblehead, which will depict him in his home run swing, mid-swing. And, of course, that'll be not necessarily the cleanup, because it's the third of our 3 bobbleheads this year, but it certainly is a big one, and I know a lot of fans are looking forward to collecting those August the 25th.
Now, Trace, of course, will be in the Ravens camp at that point, so he won't be available. But I think what's really neat is world champion David Taylor, not only a bobblehead, Joe, but he'll be at the ballpark to sign for the fans.
Absolutely, and that'll be on August 17th, Saturday night, a 7:05 game, and David Taylor will be on hand. He'll be here live in person. You can meet and greet David Taylor, get your autograph. Maybe you can get that bobblehead autographed by him as well. The first 1,000 fans of all ages get that David Taylor world champion bobblehead. And, of course, David Taylor last year in Budapest, Hungary, won the world championship at the UWW championships. He's gearing up, of course, for the 2020 Olympic Games as well. He's actually going to be wrestling this upcoming week at Beat the Streets in New York City as well. But so he is very much in full-bore preparations for all the many achievements to come. But the bobblehead that we're putting out is depicting him after he won the world championship. He raised the flag almost Rocky style, and of course, you know, he can't be a world champion without a world championship belt, so that'll be around his waist. But that is another event that wrestling fans, I'm sure, will look forward to, and that's another bobblehead I know has already got a lot of attention. People are very excited to see David Taylor, 2-time Danny Hodge Award winner on a Spikes bobblehead, and they've already expressed an interest in coming on out August the 17th.
Joe, I got to ask, why not the Ryan Bates belly rub? Why not go with that bobblehead? I mean, I don't see why Trace McSorley with a home run swing gets over Ryan Bates with the belly rub celebration. But no, if you'd done anything other than Trace, we would have made you send it back and try again. So perfect job. Perfect job.
I was going to say, ball players have been known to rub their bellies, but I don't think that's quite what we were going for. But yes, we're excited about that.
This is the third bobblehead you'll be giving away, and he'll also be there to sign.
Yes, he will. Blair Thomas's bobblehead being given away as well. Of course, one of the great running backs in Penn State history, and that bobblehead will be given away Friday, July 26th. Again, all these are the first 1,000 fans get these bobbleheads each night, and Blair will be on hand as well to meet and greet fans, sign autographs. He was a part of our All-Star festivities last year surrounding the New York Penn League All-Star game. Very popular there, and certainly still popular. Again, one of those Nittany Lion legends, and it'll be a privilege to be able to honor him with his very own bobblehead. And again, you can get that bobblehead autographed if you're one of the first 1,000 fans.
272-1711 for your tickets. And also, you can see the Spikes again this summer on WHVL. We have 4 telecasts coming up. The home opener with Williamsport, then Staten Island, West Virginia in July, and Batavia, the Marlins affiliate, coming up on August 10th. Joe, always a pleasure, my good friend.
Yes, indeed. Great to be here with you guys. And Steve, I'm looking forward to calling the action with you again this summer.
It's going to be a great summer. Thanks, Joe.
Take care, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.
Joe Putnam.
Yep.
All right, final thoughts going into the summer. I know we'll be on again next month, but still.
I think you go. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, yeah, I just want to reiterate how excited I am to cover these Spikes games on WHVL and then, start getting ready for Penn State. It's going to be a fun summer.
I think what's exciting is as much as you talk about the uncertainty of a lot of positions and new guys, but you get to find out a lot of stuff about some of the talent that Penn State's been bringing in over the last couple of years.
That's been the biggest part to me, is they've brought in so much talent. In some ways, they've passed out some of the other talent. Thanks for joining us. I'm Blue White Ball.